Black African power, and good Garvey Day to everyone. I'm going to make my remarks from a conceptual basis. The first concept is organizational unity. One of the contradictions of our struggle, and we have contradictions. Every organization has contradictions. Every ideology has contradictions, because none of us are perfect and all of us are human beings. And it is our responsibility and obligation to identify those contradictions and to rid ourselves of them. Every generation of African liberation fighters will have its own set of contradictions. As the times change, we must adjust to them. And as we adjust, contradictions will arise. The strength of a people is their ability to identify those contradictions as opposed to trying to cover them over. Organizational unity is one of our contradictions. If you go to any country, any continent, and I've been to plenty, there's 1,000,001 black organizations. And each one doesn't have many people in it. So how can we claim to be about African unity when the organizations who claim to have it as their expressed purpose don't have any between themselves? Organizational tribalism is the opposite of organizational unity. And as I travel the world, I don't care if it's Europe, Canada, Africa, Caribbean, North America, there is organizational tribalism. One organization wants to rule or dictate or considers itself better than others. Organizations have personalities just like people do. And whenever you go to an organizational meeting, you pick up on the personality of that particular organization. And just as African personalities can be toxic, so can organizations be toxic too. So one of the things we have to work on is greater organizational unity, because until the organizations are working in harmony with one another, they cannot demand that the people do it. Next is common purpose, not necessarily common ideology. Being in the Black consciousness movement, which unfortunately has its head in the United States of America, I see a lot of ideologues, people who are ideologically driven, whose focus is on ideology, not organization. Ideology hasn't freed anyone. If it did, we would all be free. We have to focus more on a common purpose. When we come to a meeting, what is the purpose? When we start an organization, what is the purpose? We shouldn't join an organization unless we know what is the purpose. Purpose will keep petty beefs to a minimum, because when you have a purpose, that means the function is attainment driven. There's a goal to be achieved that supersedes people's personal beliefs. But unfortunately, too often in the Black community, meetings and movements designed to achieve a purpose get distracted into petty ideological debates and conflicts. We have to stay focused on purpose. And Lord knows we have a lot of purposes that we need to be existing for. The third is education. And of course, I said this at the university. I'll say it in Atlanta Saturday. I'll say it in Alabama Sunday. I'll say it in Virginia the next Sunday. And that is, until we change the thinking of our children, which means we have to create our own educational institutions. Until there is a liberated education, there won't be a liberated mind. The most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said, free the mind, and the body will follow. He said, don't take the kinks out of your hair, take the kinks out of your mind. How are we going to have a free and progressive and liberated African collective consciousness when we're still allowing our children to be educated by and or in the interests of their oppressors? At the university, I spoke of how there's an alien running every African economy in the world. Well, guess what? I would say as much is true for the educational systems. I haven't been to a community yet where we have a system in place that educates African children. And that, when I speak of a system, I'm speaking of the macro level, not the micro. So obviously we have this fine institution. Across the world, we have fine, independent, African-centered institutions. But in terms of an educational system, we lack that globally. And we will never be free as long as the children are slaves. Next is code of behavior. We're the only race on the planet that doesn't have a code that we live by. Chinese have a code that they live by. If a Chinese shows up in the Bahamas tomorrow, there's a code. They don't even have to speak it. If they see another Chinaman, he will automatically behave in a way that is conducive to the best interest of that Chinaman who's visiting. Arabs have a code. East Indians have a code. European Jews have a code. Anglo-Saxons have a code. Mexicans have a code. Everyone has a code except the African. In fact, I often say that every African is a nation unto himself. Every African is a universe unto himself. Every African is a sovereign movement unto themselves, because when we meet each other, we can't make any positive assumptions about the other. I want to say that one more time. When we meet each other for the first time, we cannot make positive assumptions about the other. If I meet one of you for the first time, I cannot assume that you care about my best interests. When we meet each other for the first time, I cannot assume that your life is dedicated to African liberation. When we meet each other for the first time, I cannot assume you're willing to put your money to work for African liberation. I can't even assume you love our children. And least of all, I damn sure can't assume that you're heterosexual. How do you catch up with the other races when you have no common basis to work from? We have to learn each other all over as if it's the first African we ever met. Because there is no collective consciousness. And there is no shared vision. And when there is no collective consciousness and no shared vision, the people lose. Next, accountability, financial and political. This is controversial because as much as we claim to love African people, most of us are loyal to our tribes. We're loyal to our organizations. We're loyal to our cultural nations. We're loyal to our professional affiliations. We're loyal to our neighborhoods. We're loyal to everything except African people. And because of that, it's difficult to hold people accountable, and it's difficult to reward Africans who do the right work. Why? Because most of us will reward a coon and a sellout if they are our family or friend. And some of us will punish a freedom fighter because they are our enemy. We need a system of accountability. It is no coincidence we have the most sellouts of any race in the world, because you don't have any accountability system. In fact, you can betray African people, go to the church, get saved, come back, and do it all over again. The next one is we need a spiritual and psychological healing system. I'm a former member of the Association of Black Psychologists. And of course, we have the Association of Black Counselors and the Association of Black Social Workers and the Association of Black Therapists. And we have them in our independent countries. But I will tell you, as probably America's most premier school psychologist, that the black psychologists are not on their job. But they're not alone. There's not a single black professional organization I know of that is on their job. The black doctors are not on their job. Black lawyers are not on their job. Engineers are not on your job. The clergy definitely isn't on its job. And so one of the challenges I have when I talk to and converse with other black psychologists, what are we doing to heal our people? Most of the self-hate is a direct manifestation of the pain that has not been addressed. When the Ma'afa ended, when colonialization ended, there was no period of healing. So we are just as sick today as we was the day before freedom came to the Bahamas. Next, and I want to wrap up, restoration of eldership. But that eldership must be a responsible eldership. As a psychologist, I know that we all have two ages. We all have two. You have a biological and you have a psychological. Your biological age will show up whether you work to improve yourself or not. But your psychological age cannot move up unless you move it up through your own personal self-development. So you can be 40 biologically and you can be 4 psychologically. And so when we deal with eldership, one of the conflicts and contradictions we have in the States is some of our elders in the conscious community are partial to certain young personalities. And because they're partial, they cannot govern in a way that is impartial to all involved. So we need an eldership that's willing to be courageous and even critique other elders, which is another weakness we have amongst eldership globally. They don't want to speak to each other when they do wrong. So if the youth see that the elders can't hold other elders accountable, how can you expect the youth to submit to that elder control? And until we have eldership, it's going to be difficult to do a lot of other things because our youth need wisdom. This generation of Africans we got right now globally is probably one of the most lost generations we've ever had. Social networking could not have come at a worse time. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat could not have come at a worse time because on top of all the distractions we already had before the year 2000, we now have a whole new list of electronic distractions that were intentionally introduced into the African diaspora to further confuse African youth. Next, and these go together, I said we need a restoration of elderhood, but we also need a restoration of brotherhood and sisterhood. Coming from a psychological standpoint, I can tell you that black women are committing suicide in numbers they never did before. I can tell you black women are having nervous breakdowns in numbers they never had before. And why? Because they don't have each other. One of the reasons they don't have each other is because black women are competing for one of the brothers amongst an ever-shrinking population of available black heterosexual males. And that competition is breeding mistrust among sisters, among other things. And we need restoration of brotherhood. The ego of the Negro is clearly taking precedent over the people. I want to say it one more time. The ego of the Negro male is taking precedent over the needs of the people. Castrated black males have to work to improve their manhood without necessarily defining it as the ability to lead and flex control over other Africans. Because we have a situation where most African organizations are dictatorial in nature. As much as we hate the white man, 99% of all black organizations, spiritual and political, are totally dictatorial. There's one man at the top who knows everything, and no one else in the organization can ever contradict what they say, and especially not the sisters. Next, we need a shared vision. We ain't got to agree on everything. We ain't got to agree all the time. We just have to have certain key things that we share in common. We need to start working on the vision. I think we spend all of our time in our history and not enough time in our future. And if we're supposed to be marching towards the future, we need a shared vision so everyone is crystal clear with the third eye wide open as to what we're marching towards. And my last one, a common understanding of our enemy. And this right here might be the most important of them all. Because most conflicts that we have with each other is over how we should interact, deal with, and function with the European. Because we are not an independent people, the white man pays us, he feeds us, he houses us, he clothes us. He participates in every waking moment of our lives. And because of that, we have to decide what is our philosophy, our approach, our paradigm for dealing with the white man. Nothing divides us more than our oppressor. And it is absolutely embarrassing that after all these years, 400 next year in the United States, more than that here in the Caribbean, even longer in Africa, after hundreds of years, even millenniums, we still don't have a shared understanding of what the white man is and who he is. Which means that many of us are always ready to be flipped against our people in the interest of racial betrayal. We have to develop a common understanding of our enemy. Last and final point, when I look at the word unity, I see an acronym. The first one is unconditional. Our unity must be unconditional. Most of us do not have unconditional unity. We say we do, but we don't. We will talk about unity and walk out this room and say, I don't like him, or I don't like her, or I can't work with them, or I can't be a part of that, which makes you a hypocrite. Unity must be unconditional because love is unconditional. There's no such thing as I only love you under these circumstances. It either exists or it don't. Is there such thing as being half pregnant? So how can you be half united or half in love? You either are or you are not. You're either dead or you are alive. There are no halves to unity. It is unconditional or it does not exist. It is for nationalism. It is for nationalism. We have to make sure that we understand that we're fighting for an independent Africa and an independent people. The I is independence. Whatever must be done for the African must be done by the African. There is no white participation, nor is there any white money. The T is for technical and tactical strategy. We're good with the philosophy. We good with the books. We good with the ideology. But when it comes to sitting down and strategically and tactically plotting a plan of liberation, we are very weak for it, and the whole world knows that the Africans got all the principles, but they ain't got a single program. And why? Is youth. Until we initiate the youth into black Pan-African consciousness, and until we socialize the youth to work together for our unity, we'll never be free. I'm going to close with this one statement, brothers and sisters. Love for us and for each other is normal. It's a part of nature. Unity for us and for each other is normal. It's a part of nature. All we have to do is remove the obstacles and the love shows up. Remove the obstacles and the unity shows up. Remove that which is unnatural, and that which is natural must manifest. Black power.